Everyone, can you hear me? Perfect. It is exactly 2 p.m. here in London in the United Kingdom. I am looking at the list of participants and it's really going up and up and up. I would like to thank our panelists for joining us, for making the time to speak with us, and to the participants, and also for everyone who took the time to register, to join us, and to be part of this pivotal conversation. I am going to give us exactly 1 more minute to give a chance for anyone who is still boiling a cup of tea, who's still having lunch, who is still getting themselves ready in front of their computer or phone to be able to join us. So 60 seconds from now, I will be starting this conversation. And thank you everyone who has joined us so far. You are absolutely most welcome. Perfect. It's 2 minutes past the hour. Time really does fly when you have a lot to discuss. So I'm really going to cut to the chase. A new funding world order is the name that we gave this webinar, because everyone here, especially the panelists, agree that with everything that has been happening in the last couple of weeks or a month has really forced us to rethink the way we do development work, to rethink the way we do humanitarian work, to rethink the way the Global South actually supports our own communities. Just this hour, the British Prime Minister has announced that Britain is going to reduce overseas aid from 0.5% of GDP to 0.3%. And the rest of...
I think as we wait for Keith to rejoin, can the panelists introduce themselves? Brian can go first. Sorry, Brian can go first.
My name is Brian Aliganyira. I am a human rights defender and activist, and I'm based in Uganda, in the capital in Kampala. I run an organization called Awareness Hub. It's an LGBTQ organization that supports communities to access sexual health and mental health services. I'm happy to be here, happy to join this amazing panel, and to speak to all of you. Thank you so much.
Okay, can we have Dr. Rajiv next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. I see a lot of people from all over the world. I'm Rajiv Tandon, educationally a pediatrician and a neonatologist, was a clinician for 2 decades in India, moved from being a clinician to public health, have served various organizations, retired last year, and now at this point of time, I'm a public health practitioner. I've been a part of global platforms, Partnership for Maternal Newborn Child Health, Scaling Up Nutrition, the Confederation of Information and Accountability, and so on and so forth. Really thankful for being a part of this panel and looking forward to this discussion. I've been an advocate of Global South from the very beginning of my career. Back to you, Brenda.
Introduction. Can we have Chilande next?
Thank you, Brenda. I'm Chilande Kuloba-Warria, based out of Nairobi, Kenya, where I run Warande Advisory Center, where our core areas of focus and passion is civil society. The foundation of our work is to work on the journey of institutional strengthening for local and national organizations, and use a lot of that experience to advise and try and influence how the different key stakeholders operate with them to either serve them or catalyze their work. So working to advise philanthropy, working to to advise bilaterals, but also working to advise local and national governments on how we can have civil society thrive. And then with that, we don't just build institutions for the sake of it. We're trying to build movements that would advance the cause of civil society across the continent. And I'm very excited to be here because we play somewhere in the middle. And this particular conversation is very pertinent to us on both ends. So thank you for the invite and welcome everybody.
Thank you for that, Chilande. And I think finally it's Dr. Palo.
Hello, good morning, good evening, and good day. Thank you. I am Dr. Laxmikant Palo, representing People to People Health Foundation. We are based in New Delhi, India, and we work on a couple of important public health issues like non-communicable disease, maternal child health, nutrition, environment health, and infectious disease areas. So I am very excited to be part of this discussion today. Look forward to interacting with all of you. Thank you.
I think Keith might still be having trouble with his audio and video. Sorry about that. It was working fine a few minutes ago. Okay, I think while Keith waits for his tech to get back on, can Brian start with his experiences on the ground, given this new funding world order we're in?
Thank you so much, Brenda. And yeah, it's very unfortunate that well, technology has chosen to be had at this very important hour. But yeah, I'll start by maybe sharing a few things, my observation, especially considering that I mean our organization where I work is a beneficiary of USAID programs and USAID funding. So from 1962, when USAID started supporting Uganda, there are various projects that they have been engaged in. These include healthcare, education, governance, and economic growth. A clear example of the impact they've had is that approximately 1.5 million Ugandans do benefit from the antiretroviral programs that are free through a collaboration between the Ugandan government and USAID and PEPFAR. However, the recent funding cuts have significantly affected organizations like where I work and so many others in the country that serve specifically marginalized communities and criminalized communities like LGBTQ persons. And when you're looking at the kind of hostile environments that most of these organizations and funding that has been going to different communities, the cuts have disrupted access to services, including salaries for health workers and then peer educator programs, things like operating costs for organizations, leading to so many people losing their jobs and clinic closures. I've heard of so many clinics in Uganda that have closed as a result of the funding cuts by the US government. So I see that also the supply chain has been affected that provides life-saving drugs, including ART and others. We see that emergency medications like PEP are not provided, and then even prevention medications like PrEP have been halted for some communities. The other thing I also have paid attention to is that there is a larger ecosystem of services that so many hospitals and so many community clinics were enjoying or maybe benefiting from on the fact that the government and USAID, for example, found a way to support different structures to make sure this works for the communities and works for the country, and of course to achieve better health outcomes for everyone. These include support services like people being able to run tests for viral load and CD4 count, that ordinarily without the kind of support, people would have to pay close to or more than $50 to be able to access the kind of services. So the disruption has caused a widespread panic in the communities that we see a lot of them calling in and trying to ask if there is enough medication for them. But also we've seen cases of people trying to also hoard medication because they don't know how longer the medication that's on the shelves is going to last them. Someone reminded me of an instance during COVID where, for example, because of lack of access to medications, many of them used to take one pill every other day, skip a day and then take another because you're not sure of how long you're going to live without this medication, which is sort of going to relapse their treatment and probably affect their vital suppression, something that we all want to achieve when we're doing this work. The other thing I think I noticed that it has come a bit of as a I would say maybe unclear and also as a problem is that, yes, we know there is a waiver, and the waiver was communicated by the US Secretary of State, that life-saving medications can continue and can be given to people. The biggest problem about this is that even with that waiver, things like the supply chain being restored was not really catered for, and maybe salaries of health workers or calling them back to work were not spoken about. And when you say we should continue getting life-saving medication, but the people who are supposed to supply it and people who are supposed to prescribe it and support communities are not anywhere around, it means the effect in the communities is still not going to change. So we still don't know, we are still in balance, and we don't know how far this is going to go, because constantly the demand for their life-saving drugs, their life-saving responses, that we don't know how far we're going to have to live through this, but we continuously see a lot of demand from communities, and we see a lot of panic going on in communities and even in the workforce, because there are a lot of people in this entire response that are not mainly maybe healthcare workers, but generally work to support healthcare workers, people who are in programming, people who are scientists in different organizations and entities that are supported by PEPFAR. So yes, there is still going to be a big problem, especially having to wait 3 months of a result that none of us knows really. And I hope, I don't know, this kind of platform and maybe many more can help us maybe have answers and solutions to this kind of problem. Thank you. Back to you, Brenda.
Thank you so much, Brian, for your insights on what's on the ground at the moment. Just in the meantime, you can share any questions you have that will be addressed at the end of the session. And I think next in line would be Dr. Palo to share his insight on the USAID funding cut. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. And we all know that the challenging time we all are going through. The important part at this point of time is going for environmental scanning, landscaping of the funding options in the context of the current challenges, and financial needs for immediate and long-term plan also. That's very critical at this point of time. I know many of the development partners are going through a exercise more rapid situational analysis and mapping of different offbeat funding sources also at this point of time, so that how we can, at least if we cannot replace the funding, at least minimize some of those gaps, and also different strategies, redefining strategies how to have different kind of funding, because USAID funding mechanism was different and the ticket size were generally large in nature. So now the diversifying the funding situation will be little different, and many organizations have beyond USAID programs, so probably they have better understanding of different other kind of funding. But those who have more dependent on USAID funding, of course, they have to go through a exercise how to work on those different options, new funding outreach mechanism. But what at this point of time is very important is more collective action, so that more collective voice, collective actions are needed, so that we can have a better pitch to have more appealing for new funding sources. So some of the ideas that I see that could be new options or existing options, expanding those, the big foundations. We know that all big foundations know how they can come up with those ideas, and private sector companies, we all have been working. That could be another. So increasing some of the CSR or even the marketing funding. Private sector companies have marketing funding also. Sometimes we don't reach to that segment. Probably that is another also option to see. An ultra high reach network individuals, what we call UHNIs, and impact funds could be another ways to also see. Crowdfunding, we all know that could be but developing a set of options that go beyond the obvious choices, because now we have to see a different way of fundraising. Maybe co-funding could be another way of expanding, and pool funding is another way also to look after the new funding mechanism. So private sector partnership, many of the agencies are also experienced how to leverage those partnerships, and funding is also critical at this point of time. So localization of key strategy, that's what we have to see more local funding sources, like, so that our strategy should be more localized and cost-effective funding mechanism, because it cannot be USAID type of funding mechanism and the nature of funding. So the funding mechanism need to be changed. The role of expert consulting or fundraising agency is very important. I would like to bring that in nature, particularly for two reasons. One is building a well-crafted donor engagement plan, because they have the experts, they have the contacts, so that maybe many development partners, if they have not reached to these agencies, probably that could be like, I can give one or two examples, like Give to Asia, Satwa, these kind of funding networks who have better connect with the funders, diverse funders, sectors, and also with the development partners. That could be one way, so that they have a better engagement plan and also advocacy support towards building a high quality pitch deck. I think this expert consulting and fundraising agencies role probably could be more critical at this point of time to bridge those gaps and also connect the implementing agency with the fundraising. So I see three priority fundraising streams. One is corporate partnership, second is major foundations, third is major emphasis on digital media crowdfunding. So if we can focus, because many of you probably already working on that, so that could be one way that we can go forward. And particularly, I will talk a little bit about Asia environment, because that 20 of the maybe big foundations, the funders are in Asia. So many of the countries are going from middle to higher income groups. So a lot of funding options are there, and many NGOs also, they have set up their country-specific fundraising outlets, like in many of the Asian countries, like Singapore, Thailand, India, Hong Kong, Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Korea. So I think that's another way. So the need for a thriving local fundraising and philanthropic ecosystem become very urgent. So but most of these fundings are more country specific. So we have to see also our strategy redefining how we can have more country specific fundraising strategy, because many of these foundations I know in Asia, they are more focused in in country, like say Tata Trust or Rajiv Premji Foundation or Anil Agarwal Foundation. There are many other foundations in the Singapore and Hong Kong and other areas, other countries. So those are more focused in their own country, very less in other countries. So we have to see what are those opportunities in the current country. So fundraising strategies to follow overall fundraising directions, donor segmentation strategy is important, and positioning strategy, how we repositioning, I will say, and case for support. So these are the couple of ideas that I see probably needed going forward, and we need more collective actions together working for this new strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Palo, for that. Sorry about the technical difficulties again. Next, we'd like to invite Dr. Rajiv to give his point of view. Thank you.
Thanks, Brenda, and really sad that Keith is not leading this whole effort. He had really put us into a beautiful situation. But I think, Keith, you need to plan a next follow-on call for what happens today. So I'll just take it forward from where Dr. Palo left us. What I feel is, and as I'm coming from India, sharing the Indian context and the Indian story, that this is a real opportunity for Global South to really look at what needs to be done, how it needs to be done, the prioritization, the plan, the decision of who should be the partners, what does whole of society mean, what does whole of government mean, how do we ensure that when we are focusing on Global South, we are actually really looking at working differently with different mechanisms, methods, identifying what are our strengths, possibly doing a SWOT analysis, and then deciding a short, medium, and a long-term plan. Uh, what I think is important is each country will have to step up now. Uh, when we talk of what has happened in India, so India is a bit of a mixed bag. We are a semi-continent. We are 1.4 billion people. We have diversities beyond compare. So we have areas where human indicators, developmental indicators are good. We have areas where we are abysmally down in the dumps. But what we have seen in India are institutions that have been set up, which know how and where and when to take forward what Dr. Palo has just mentioned, um, actually looking at not only doing things the routine way, but identifying clearly innovative approaches, innovative systems, rationalization of efforts, looking at cost effectiveness, looking at feasibility, looking at deciding what is a standard of evidence for Global South. There is going to be, and I don't think the last word has been heard, because when at least what Keith was with us and we could hear him, what he mentioned was that what has started in the US is now following on even in Europe. He mentioned that the British Prime Minister had reduced developmental funding, and also potentially other European countries will follow. Their priority right now is different, and this will have to be the time when Global South will have to decide on how do we take our situation forward, how do we decide on ensuring that what Brian has mentioned as disruptions, which are humongous disruptions, which are life-taking disruptions, which are things which have to be sorted out, can somehow be taken care of. Uh, yes, climate change, digital, artificial intelligence, are all issues which impact the South as much as possibly the North. So we will have to look at models which are not only as of today, but possibly futuristic. Mathematical modeling will have to be done to actually predict what Global South could see. We've heard of Ebola somewhere, we've heard of floods and cyclones somewhere. So how do we put it all together? I think what Keith has started needs to be followed on, not only just at the end of this webinar, but actually as clear next steps with a plan of action. He has got all of us together, and I'm told that there are potential funders also who are with us today. How can we ensure that this actually carries on into a possibly a 6-month plan of action with clear roles and responsibilities between the Global South countries or regions? There is a time when clustering approaches will also have to be mandated, and we've seen it in Africa, where Africa Union put together a couple of clusters of different countries, sub-Saharan and so on and so forth. Can we do that for the Global South? Totally. We are in a situation where there are certain diseases which have been sort of eliminated in many, many countries, but we are seeing them still persistent in our areas. How do we ensure that that part is taken care of? And I'm especially mentioning polio. We have it in Pakistan, we have it in Afghanistan, we have it in a few countries in Africa. So I'll stop there. Would be happy to answer questions, but I think number one, this is a very timely grouping of all of us coming together. We need to ensure that we take it forward, put in our individual, organizational, group might to it, and see that this disruption actually becomes an opportunity for us to see things in a different way and form. Thank you. Back to you, Brenda.
Thank you for that. But yeah, before we get our final speaker, before Chilande comes on, can we have some questions? Does anyone have any questions to share? You can just type and then we'll answer the questions at the end of the session. Okay, now we can have Chilande joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Brenda. And I'm so sorry, Keith. I know we had a lot to say when we were preparing for this conversation. And my colleagues before me have put forward some very strong points. And I think what I could do to add on to that is a little bit more context, especially from where I sit and where I know best, which is, my continent in Africa. I would almost argue that USAID, I've been saying to a lot of people that I've been talking to, is that USAID is actually late to this very bad party of folks refocusing. I think, sat out of from Nairobi, where I've been doing this work over several decades now, we went through a huge shift, when Canadian Cedar went down like several decades ago, when there were huge mammoths before in this sector. We've gone through in Kenya, post-election violence, where we saw a huge shift of funders leaving. More recently, in the recent years, a lot of European nations have been doing this. I think USAID is just one of many that have just added and now given more confidence to, for example, what I'm hearing today, Keith, you saying about the British government further reducing what they had already reduced in the recent years. And so I want to look at the whole ecosystem, folks, from where we are seated. And as usual, my lens is always, my first love remains civil society. The civil society, for me, must thrive and not just survive this. And how do we do that? And I think this conversation is more advancing us there. We must shift away from this dependency that we've had for a very long time, imagining that big funders will be there, and get ourselves to financial independence. And so my comments really are around that. How do we move beyond donor dependence, and what replaces some of these old funding models that have been there? How do we now tackle the pertinent issues of strengthening accountability and trust? Because credibility will determine who gets funded or who gets funding, regardless of where that money comes from. And then we must look at our policy and regulatory environment, because getting us well-funded CSOs can still not operate if we don't think about the restrictive environments in which some of us operate in, certainly a lot of the African countries that I know of. And then we must, of course, explore some of these more sustainable financial models that we, colleagues have already gone ahead of me and spoken about. So if I look at this, moving beyond donor dependency, we must begin to look at creative ways of looking at ideas such as blended finance and impact-driven funding. How do we engage businesses, investors, and philanthropists in new ways, not the same old ways, because those have led us here to where when one big funder moves away, we are all shaken. How do we decline international aid by mobilizing some homegrown resources, private sector investments, and south-to-south partnerships? And how do we demand, how do we meet the increasing demand that that Brian, for example, has really just given us some realism? More is being demanded on local CSOs with fewer and fewer resources. We cannot do this. We must think about our governments, and how do governments create policies that support local philanthropy to thrive? Because again, we may talk to philanthropy, but if the environment is not working, then it doesn't help. So that we're looking at, we're talking about public-private partnerships. They're there. Businesses can fill this gap, can still make their money and still do good. This private sector, I think, is already stepping up, and I think it is time for us to spotlight some of these initiatives. We think about African Green Co in Zambia and Kenya, where we are seeing some private investments in renewable energy. We think about M-Pedigree in Ghana that's tackling counterfeit medicine. We think about folks like Zipline in Rwanda and Ghana, where drones are, delivering life-saving supplies. So there's a lot of initiatives there. Of course, the usual, the usual Twigas and M-Copas in Kenya. But what we're saying here is that civil society and governments must shift from philanthropy-based partnerships and start to think about shared value investments. What does that look like in terms of the relationship, but also what does that mean for us as a sector in terms of the skills that we bring into our teams also? It has implications on how we think, how we strategize, how we resource ourselves in terms of people. When we think about, again, allow me to use Global South, I know many of us are moving towards the global majority. Can we really fund ourselves? We have to look to initiatives that are giving us hope. We have to look to African Development Bank's Africa 50 Fund, for example, that's trying to mobilize African-led investments and see how many more of those can we bring. We must look to the diaspora, look at things like diaspora bonds. I know that there's government-led initiatives in countries like Ethiopia and Nigeria, Ghana, even Kenya. We must look at tapping into those remittances, and the numbers are staggering that we've been looking at of late. However, the problem with diaspora, sources, the question of credibility and transparency of our governments and how they take this money and what they do with this money becomes a problem. And that's why we must think about the whole ecosystem and see how do we solve that so that more and more of that comes in. When we hear that Kenya surpassed its 17.5 targets of diaspora remittances into an 18% remittances to our GDP, that's something encouraging. What more can we do so that it gets bigger? Now, we have to think about then the enabling policy and regulatory environments within which we are operating. That civil society today is crippled in the way that it is because of the complex registration processes that delays us to operations. We have to think about some of the restrictive laws that are continuing to limit civic space, and then look at the tax barriers that are discouraging local philanthropy to happen. So how do we work? How do those who have funding, how do you fund those ecosystem players that are trying to streamline registration and compliance issues? I know I'm part of a collaborative with a few colleagues of mine, TechSoup, Epic Africa, Catalyst Now, and Adesso's Kujalink, trying to unlock this whole conversation around compliance. Is it a must for us to jump through some of those hoops? We must think about how does civil society operate and advocate freely? How do we protect them? What kind of incentives do we need to add? And then really rethink public CSO partnerships so that we shift the relationship from this government's always just, providing oversight on us and actually beginning to collaborate. So what you're calling for, Dr. Palo, collaboration must also occur between governments and civil society so that we have better policies, tax incentives, and streamlined compliance systems that also enable the sector to grow. Otherwise, we will raise money and it will go nowhere. So saying that, then I want to end by spotlighting the fact that we must really, really strengthen accountability and trust in order to attract the new funders that we are talking about. As a sector, and that's who I'm talking to, and that's who I always represent, we must start to think about this new landscape. Whatever funders, whether it's businesses or philanthropists or investors that are coming in, we must demand this across the board, really highlighting and spotlighting progressive processes like participatory grant making, that when we're coming up with funding decisions or defining our strategies, communities are at the center. Folks like Trust Africa have been championing such causes. The ideas around trust-based philanthropy, how do we make that the practice so that we become more outcome-driven in our funding over compliance and, and regulations for that. So folks like Acumen Fund, for example, give us those examples. We also must think about open data and impact measurement. It would be amazing if we all came up with a standard way of measuring impact so that we don't always split our energies in trying to meet standards set by very unique funders. That there must also be some visible impact tracking, not just reports. So we look to folks like Follow the Money in Nigeria, I think that's what they're called, that are trying to look at where is the money coming from, where is it going, is it being utilized? We must have more and more of those initiatives that really help us to be more transparent, results-driven, and community-centered. I won't talk too much about the alternative funding models because I think colleagues have talked about it, but just spotlight things like blended finance. How do we merge impact and returns? People like AVPA are good for that. That's Africa Venture Philanthropists Alliance, I think, have been trying to put forward a lot of ideas around impact investing and venture philanthropy. We must not underestimate the value and the emerging practice of crowdfunding and community financing. These are things that help us to tap local support. You know, we have platforms like Mchanga in Kenya and many others that enable this. And I think colleagues have talked a lot about corporate social investments, and we must bring that back. It was vibrant once upon a time in East Africa, and I know folks like East Africa Philanthropy Network, Africa Philanthropy Network are still championing this kind of causes. So folks, I know we had a very short time, so let me put forward those just to look at the whole ecosystem. Even as we think about alternative models, we must look at how do we rebuild the whole structure in order for those alternatives to come in, do the work that they need to do, and even go further. So yeah, thank you for that.
I am going to try again to see if I'm actually back. I apologize to everyone who is listening to us, anyone who has been waiting for me. Believe me, we've planned this. It went smoothly. As soon as we press send, my internet just went dead. But I've been listening. Thank you, Rajiv. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Chilande. Thank you, Dr. Palo. I just have a few follow-up questions, and please indulge me. Rajiv, how do we learn from the India experience? And how can the African continent think differently about this? Why am I saying so is that I was speaking to someone today who said we actually should really rethink the entire structure of development and humanitarian response. As you see, I'm not using the word aid anymore. Which are those partners that we need to bring on board? How can companies actually think of their bottom line when they are thinking of how to respond to development needs and humanitarian needs? Back to you, Rajiv.
Well, welcome back, Keith. So good to have you. First of all, I think when we want to learn from India, we have to appreciate that India has had strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So it's been a mixed bag. But exactly the way Chilande mentioned, India actually created a situation where developmental assistance was reduced from multiple countries in the 2005 era. So we saw Russia, we saw Sweden, we saw Denmark, we saw, I think, Switzerland, we saw so many of them actually being told to leave. Second, India actually created a situation where developmental assistance was only something like a catalytic fund. It was not a fund that went into creating health systems. It was not a fund that went into having human resources put in place and so on and so forth. But it was a fund which was really focusing on technical assistance, looking at piloting and modeling, and ensuring that looking at sustainability, scalability, feasibility, but not scaling up, not actually taking it to scale. Uh, the next point was that, in spite of whatever the world knows of India, India has seen bipartisan support through something like presidential initiatives, something like funded presidential initiatives in the form of missions. So we've had something called the National Rural Health Mission, we've had the National Urban Health Mission, we've had the National Nutrition Mission, the National Wash Mission, and these missions have actually focused on devolution to the absolute local community, not only of funds, but also of accountability and governance. We have seen a word called communitization being used in policies and programs in the form of having human resources identified from the community, build capacity, and used for service delivery, last mile, etc. On the other side, this whole legal aspect of having corporates to put in a certain percentage of their funding into social responsibility, which has a list already pre-identified, and nutrition and health and water and sanitation and education and so on and so forth have been there. And the country has seen this. Last point was the learnings from polio eradication and the learnings from COVID were actually taken to beyond COVID and polio. So while we were focusing on polio eradication, routine health systems were seeing a problem, routine immunization was seeing a problem. But then very quickly, everything that we had learned in polio, because that was a very well funded, globally focused program, was taken to the other routine immunization, then maternal newborn child health, etc. And in COVID, I love the way Chilande mentioned on the issues of need for regulatory fragility, need for decision on how much of regulation do civil society need for who would be an ombudsman, where would an appellant go to ensure that we can move things fast. And COVID actually created those pathways. We saw vaccine development, we saw medical technology development, we saw basic sciences, life sciences, human sciences, social sciences all come together and work on ensuring survival. I personally feel that this is an opportunity where, yes, every country would want to focus on themselves, their areas, resource mobilization for their organization, and so on and so forth. But if somehow we can create a bi-directional learning between South-South, Africa has so much to offer, and so does this part of Asia. Central Asia has so much to offer. Not only just donors, but also models, mechanisms, systems, champions. If you remember when MDGs were closing down and Ray Chambers was asked by the UN leadership to identify MDG global advocates. And I think 200 of them were identified practically in every country. And these were then made to meet together. So the African MDG advocate was not talking Africa, was talking on how do we benefit all of Southeast Asia or all of Asia or all of Latin America. And we need to do that again. And we need to be cognizant of when we have to stand on our own feet. We know that out-of-pocket expenditure is a challenge with our poorest patients. How do we fill that up? How do we become, if not global advocates, but at least regional advocates? So I love this global majority. Yes, we are the global majority. And within global majority, Chilande, I would also add BRICS, I would add SAARC, I would add Indo-Pacific. So there are areas that have been identified. How do we leverage all of them? How do we leverage whatever is already existing and create a common nomenclature? I have spent my childhood in Monrovia in Liberia, and that's why I understand that area. There are a lot of nomenclatures which Africa says and uses differently than what Asia uses. How do we come together? How do we actually stand up together? And we are the numbers. We are the numbers. If we get together, yes, we will have problems, but we'll be able to tide over it and possibly look at sustainability for the first very time, actually bottom up. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajiv. Thank you. That is really, really very, very helpful. I would like to go to some of the questions that we're beginning to have, and there are quite a few of them. So I'm really going to whiz through them. And this goes to all our four panelists. The first is, and you can answer whichever you feel you're most passionate about. Define what transformational partnerships mean in the context of the Global South development. I'll say that again. Define what transformational partnerships mean in the context of Global South development. The second question is, how do you see the situation in 5 years' time? And can Northern Hemisphere CSOs do to support? So I'll stop with those two questions for now. Let us whiz through them quickly because there are others that are coming up. But Dr. Palo, Chilande, and Brian, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Maybe I can take a couple of questions. One, in next 5 years, we need to have a redefining the whole funding situation. As I mentioned, that more local fundraising plan. Second, also looking for more cost leveraging model. Like say, if you go to a donor and ask, okay, I need 100% of the funding, then another person is coming with, I need only 20%, 30% or 50%. Maybe that is more appealing. So we have to see co-funding and maybe part funding. That's one model. Second, also we have to see more sustainable social enterprise modeling in next 5 years, so that because we have to create the situation like India, Dr. Tandon also mentioned, it's not in every country. I see Indonesia and a couple of industrialist countries have that option where more corporates are present. But it's not the case of in many African or Asian countries. So how we can have those kind of more diversification funding model, even the some very innovative funding models, that we have to see. So those are the next, because we have to completely redefine our strategy, not depending on the so-called grant modeling. We have to go beyond the grant modeling. And while maybe you can test a innovation through a small grant, but go for a social enterprise as a next step. Now, those kind of ideas we need to build a next 5-year strategy of every organization, every development partner should define that how we can minimize the donor dependency and go for different innovative funding models. Thank you.
Chilande? Oh, sorry, Brian.
Oh, thank you so much. The two questions are sort of like both an answer to each other in a way. I mean, like in my own thinking, but also most of the issues that we are mentioning here are also very, very structural. These are things that are maybe like a systemically like drawn or maybe like into our communities. When Chilande was speaking about some of us coming from countries that are very, very restrictive in terms of like policies, in terms of laws, in terms of even like local civil society organizations, you find that the way we work and the way we fundraise and the way we even deliver our work is very different from maybe some other places, I mean, around the world. So when I look at where I want to be in 5 years and also the transformational transformative partnership, what it kind of means to me. So I would say first, it has to do with everything we have to do today. A lot of us might have to start by challenging a lot of like the policies that we have, trying to change them, because without them, we cannot change so much. So we need to deal with this, the structures first to be able to get where we want to get. There are so many funding we can't have access to because of the nature of the work that we do. There is so much we cannot maybe discuss because of the work that we do. But also sometimes when you speak to different businesses that are very successful international agencies that are working within and then around us, you find that even when they have corporate social responsibility, or maybe they want to do a bit of like support to specific organizations or to issues, they pick on the issues based on the countries where they are based. So you find that maybe like in some places, some issues can be supported and some issues can be supported. So you find that there's also like, cherry picking of what issues are issues to different communities. And then this does not represent everyone else in the kind of communities that we come from. So it sort of like makes our work very disjointed in a way. So I would say the work that we have to do mainly is around maybe building structures and making sure we also challenge the policies and the laws that are in our countries that hinder or maybe slow down the kind of work that we want to do. And the other thing I would think about is probably trying to find again, like someone mentioned, called is it like funding in like sort of like in a generalized funding, like in a pool whereby, for example, you don't only support maybe a different program in an area, but support maybe countrywide or regional programs to make sure, like maybe if you're looking at East Africa or Sub-Saharan Africa, you need to have like a program that sort of represents everyone and where everyone wants to go. The biggest problem we have around this is, against, as I mentioned, is that everyone feels like they have to pull resources only to their issues and only to their spaces. But when you do that on a very small scale, I mean, the issues keep on crossing the border, I mean, like overflowing to different places. I've seen how these bad laws, these restrictive laws, maybe flow from Uganda to Kenya to DRC to Tanzania. So we need to consistently work together to make sure we sort of like end the repressive laws and the policies, and also do fundraising all together for where we share like common interests, and make sure our organizations, again, as organizations as also countries or as people, like are able to benefit from this. Yeah, I think that's maybe what I can share briefly for now.
Chilande?
All right, I know time is not on our side, so I'm going to try and be concise, but this is such a trigger for me. I'll try and answer real quick. I think one thing I'll say is transformational partnerships in the Global South, really, what does it look like? I think in a nutshell, I would just say what that looks like here is a lot more equity, a lot more long-term collaboration that shifts the powers that have been there for so long, resources, and more importantly, decision-making to local communities, not just the actors. And in so saying, I think, I hear what you're asking, what does it look like in 5 years' time, and how can the Northern Hemisphere help? First, I want to challenge, I think it's Jasmina who said it. First and foremost, how can we help you? Let's start from there, because a lot of what is going on is happening there, and it's really impacting your realities a lot. It's impacting our realities too. But we are a resilient people in the global majority. We've gone through so much, we still go through a lot. And I think what this is doing is kicking us and telling us, guys, get up. It's time to do something. And this is what this conversation is starting, is it's time to get up, folks. Reality has checked in. All those things we were told, diversify funding, sort out your systems. We are now, the reality is here, the theories we've all been talking about. So we are sorting ourselves out. What can we do to help the Northern Hemisphere that this stops happening, that you take back the humanity that seems to be eroding, that where you can make decisions that impact people's lives and don't seem to have the urgency to correct those. So what can we do to help? What you can do to help us is be, and I love the word you've thrown out there, Dr. Rajiv, what happened in India. I like that word. You can be catalytic in the sense that don't bring solutions anymore. I think you need to stop and listen. Come here, because we are sorting ourselves out. Best believe this group here and many others that are on this group, we are sorting ourselves out. What we need is folks that will catalyze our efforts, because the efforts are there, the ideas are there. There's nothing new at this point. What we need is international partners that listen, sit down and actually listen to us properly. That what we also need as a global majority world is take back our narrative. It's really change how, yes, I love your spotlight on the language we use. We are the majority. How come we are speaking like using terminologies that are being imported? How do we turn storytelling to show our impact? How do we take back words? How do we bring back sayings and proverbs back into demonstrating our work and communicating, connecting with our people? How do we change the stories and that have long caused the kinds of, paternalistic behaviors that we see coming to us, because people see certain things in the media because we are not taking part in putting out there the image. So I think we need to do more of that. And what the Northern Hemisphere can do is be catalytic to that. I think they can be that, but also true trust and partnership between the global majority and that world is where there's humility in it. So that when you also feel that when you also are going through problems, which right now I feel like you also are, you can also come back to us and say, what can I learn from India? What can I learn from Africa? How do we connect? This is what I know. What do you know? So I think it's time to change the relationship completely. If there was ever a time when we've been proven that no one side has all the answers, I think it's now. So I think that's how, in many words, Keith, I would respond to that.
Thank you so much. I am looking at the time, and I really need to give all the panelists a chance to respond, to say one final word. I am also seeing more questions that are coming in. What we shall do is that after here, we shall share the questions with the panelists and then add them to the follow-up document that we're going to share with everyone. Personally, I haven't said much for obvious reasons, but I must say that what I hear us take away is new partnerships that are really shaking the foundations of what we used to think aid was. I'm looking at, and I like Rajiv, you don't want to use the word transition. We're using the word the bridge to the horizon of where we want to be. And then lobbying Global South stakeholders, especially governments, the private sector, to get involved in development and humanitarian development that really is not even sitting at the same table, but building a totally different table. And so for me and the New Global Markets team, we are really, really very excited. And this is the beginning of so many conversations. But before we leave this space, I want to ask just for you to give us a couple of lines, each of you, on one, can we truly live without global North money? And two, how can we stop ourselves from regressing in case it was to come back again? Those two questions, and we shall call it a day. Dr. Palo, first to you.
No, thank you. I think we have to really, this could be a time of rethinking, because the risk was always there, actually. Probably we were on a denial mode, probably. So I think this is the time, we need to reflect back and bring the diversity, in that in our thinking, and look locally. That's what the message that I will reinforce again, and go beyond the traditional way of thinking and fundraising.
Thank you.
I think we have to have that reshifting, completely reshifting of our approach. Thank you.
Thank you. Brian?
Well, on the first question about the global North money, well, the thing is, everything at a point either comes to an end by itself, or maybe you have to make it. So my strong belief here is that I think it can happen, but it has to take a lot of work on our end also to make sure we do the right things, and we are very intent about them. On stopping regressing, I think to stop regressing, I would say, again, we need to start looking at the future and not just right now. Let's look at 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 years from right now, where we want to go, and make sure we intentionally do the things we plan to do and make sure we get on with them, and not probably just react to every situation just is thrown onto us. Thank you.
Thank you. Chilande?
I think I've said a lot.
A couple of lines only.
Yeah, I know. I think we can do this. We can do this, but we can't, and we are doing it. Can we live without that money? I think we can. We have been, actually, and many communities still do it. It's how those of us who are here, who have gotten more privilege to advance ourselves a little bit more than our other brothers and sisters. How do we go back and bring back the rest? How do we go back and uplift the rest so that they join us? I think the responsibility is on us way more than on the external parties. And I think it's time we started to demonstrate that. So I'm excited for the future, actually.
Thank you.
And we are getting up.
Rajiv, a few final words?
Yeah, absolutely. But I would shift to actually what we can do immediately.
Yeah.
I think, and you mentioned 5 years, exactly 5 years is when SDGs come to an end. The SDG has a framework, it has monitoring indicators, it has everything else that we want to start with. Can we actually create, and I love what Chilande mentioned about we are resilient people, and that's a fact. What we can go through, the North cannot go through. So can we create an indicator of resilience and use the SDG framework, and between us define a group that does upstream work, which is advocacy, identifying champions, and blah, 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 and also a downstream work, which ensures that what Brian is raising does not actually create a situation of terror or of humanitarian crisis. And if we can do that quickly, if we can do that possibly in a month or so, and then do costing for it, and jointly then go to all the various potential sources of funding. And I think we have work carved out for us. Stop thinking of just our area, our country, and our locality, but looking at, I love this global majority. And that mindset will create our leadership in us, which will take us beyond this challenge.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rajiv. I would like to thank everyone out there who has stayed on, everyone who's been patient with the glitches and the internet drama that I have had. I have been speaking to quite a few people in the last week and in this hour, and the words partnerships keep coming about. The word, the Global South majority, which I have learned, the words death to grant entrepreneurship, basically living from one grant to the other, which doesn't really work, but also that bridge so that we do not lose what we have created, but that bridge that takes us between now and that horizon where we want to be. We pledge at New Global Markets that we shall definitely share all this information with you. Dr. Rajiv, thank you for that immediate, the upstream, downstream, the indicator of resilience, which I have never heard of, but I'm going to borrow and steal and use. Thank you very much, everyone, for your time. We shall be right back by latest tomorrow with a bit of the video that worked, and also with the action points from this lesson and from this time and from this webinar and from this space. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, good afternoon, and good night.